Hey guys, my name is Moon and welcome back for more Witch on the Holy Night. So last episode, it's finally over. The battle in Kitsyland is done, but I don't know what's gonna happen next as we didn't really see Alice right after Aoko finished the battle, right? Aoko and Soldier were walking, they were leaving, but let's see what happens. So we're gonna also, I think, start a new episode, if I'm correct. Yes, next episode, Like a Dog. Okay. Let's see what happens here. He was still in a deep sleep. It seemed all ablaze in a mid-fiery red. Unbearable, idle thoughts, incessant obstinacy, melancholy sights, and gloomy, bitter-sweet talk. Fickle wickedness born of human interaction, namely the voice of forsaken coexistence. This, however, was the scenery of a world far removed from that. If there were those praying this was paradise, then there were likely also those lamenting it as the underworld. In a decade, or perhaps longer, this would all change, but for now, the autumn leaves remained yet untrampled by human souls. It was scenery he knew well. Life in the mountains was humble and modest. There were no conspicuous buildings among this wilderness he called home. They gathered and stockpiled only what they needed to survive without pillaging the land. Serpentine trails could be seen woven through the fields, and the stone steps leading to the summit were obscured by the forest, only visible once upon them. The mountain inhabitants probably intended it that way. There was no sign of mankind's exploitation among the mountain landscape. He suddenly remembered that this was the season he liked the most, or rather, it suited him the most. There was much to be done to prepare for winter, but whenever he had a free moment, he would make his way toward the mountaintop, gazing idly at the setting sun while breathing deep the crisp autumn air was probably the second favorite of his daily joys. It relaxed him, the cold but comforting wind at dusk, and the way the sunset dyed the peaks a vibrant crimson. Not 2 months had passed since coming down from the mountains, and already it pained him that the memories had begun to fade. Someone once told him that memories fade away every day, so the best you one do. What? Is make as many new ones as possible. Yeah, it should be the best you can do, I guess. Is make as many new ones as possible. Recollections grew hazy. A new place to live meant the beginning of a new life. He wasn't sure if he was reluctant to let go of the scenery he'd cherished for so long, or if he'd merely been spoiled by it. Despite his new home, in a city surrounded by tall buildings, he felt guilty for wanting those memories alone to remain clear in his mind. Either way, he had to make the best of a fresh start. What kind of man thinks more about where he came from than where he's going, he contemplated.
そうか。これ、夢だ。
He tried to stop himself from indulging in uncharacteristic sentimentality. It wouldn't be a dream if it was easy to understand. The moment he realized he was dreaming, angular shadows began to rise from the autumn colors. They were concrete buildings, previously unknown and yet familiar to him at the same time. This was how his current life was washing away his memories. Struggle as he might, there was no stopping the degradation of human memory or impressions. It was merely a fact of life. By nature, humans lived in the present over the past. Eventually, even his most cherished memories would be swallowed up by the buildings. It was neither cruel nor heartless. If they were sure to disappear, then for now he would content himself with dreaming about the memories he could clearly recall. Whether in the mountains or the cities, the days flew by. Yesterday's scenery was not the same as today's. And such? Look at Ako. She's right there. She had given him no time to grieve. Distant nostalgia was beautiful, but made it fleeting.
土産入道じゃないんだぞ、青崎。
A faint dizziness made him close his eyes. Without sight, the mountainous landscape vanished, but in its place, a familiar voice could be heard. It was a booming voice that seemed to shake not only the mountainside he stood upon, but the entire mountain as well. And of course, Aoko Aozaki reappeared, towering in the distance. He must have been tired, he thought, diagnosing himself while trying to make out what she was saying. Fearing the vertigo would return if he reopened his eyes, he decided to keep them closed. It sounded like she was arguing with someone, though the tone was all he could make out. It wasn't violent, but it was certainly aggressive. Maybe she was picking a fight with another mountain across the way? He wouldn't put it past her. After all, she was a troublemaker who blew up the moon. What is happening here? Is she maybe like talking to Alice? He couldn't quite grasp the conversation. Though somehow vaguely he had a sense that his human rights were being largely ignored, it was deeply unsettling even for a dream. After several minutes, it seemed that the high-impact argument ended in Aoko's victory. Then suddenly the boisterous voice faded. Praying everything would be back to normal, he opened his eyes. He took a deep, slow breath. The scenery was a far cry from the nostalgic dreamscape he had just left, albeit not pleasant or unpleasant either. Without a doubt, it was the amusement park. To him, his was his freshest memory. He recalled the house of mirrors that Aoko Aozaki destroyed. This park was a flawless replica of reality, but he was the only one there. Without having to worry about anyone chasing him, he sat down in the wreckage of the Kitsy rides and looked up at the moon that should have been shot down. The winter moon shone white like a jewel. It was layered over the figure of the girl who tried to kill him. If a mage was a witch, then she definitely fit the bill. I don't mind being killed. Such an absurd thing to say, but it spilled out of him so naturally.
いや、でも。
That had nothing to do with the witches or magecraft. There was an echo in the gaps of his heart. If she had not spoken those words, then he would not have responded as he did. In that moment, what had Aoko Aozaki said to him? As he tried to remember, his deep slumber drew to an end. And with it, his chance to find the answers he so wished he could find. The music was beautiful there, man. No joke. Then, Sojiro woke up in an unfamiliar room, gasping. Not because the plush mattress he was on was softer than his apartment's cheap futon, or because everything from the carpet to the wallpaper looked expensive. So, Sojiro is definitely in the mansion now. The mansion on the hill. And I guess, yeah, Aoko and Alice stalked it out, right? It's Alice. She's watching him. Bewildered, he tried to catch his breath. She was the cause of his surprise. The moment Sojiro's eyes snapped open, there she was. The girl dressed in black, sitting at his bedside. The silence was deafening. Did you imagine that, right? This person was literally trying to kill you. Right? And then now when you woke up, she's next to you. What would you do? Still supine in the bed, Sojiro gazed at her. His impulse was to sit up, but he refrained, thinking it might be rude to be staring at the person next to him. She was just sitting there in a chair, dressed in black, modest clothes. Still, she projected an air that was anything but plain. Her monochrome outfit evoked indescribable elegance, like a costume handmade just for her from the finest fabrics. It was enough to inspire poetic sentiments even in Sojiro. The girl continued to sit, completely motionless. Without realizing it, Sojiro had stopped breathing. Genuine astonishment had him captivated. Such beauty. It was the first time he had ever thought to use such a simple, plain expression to describe another human being. She was the daffodil in perfect bloom, or the ideal female form seen only in dreams. This quality was something to be cherished and admired in her. It was different from Aoko Aozaki's blindingly radiant vitality. After all, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And there was no way this girl would be allowed such a happy ending. Her life was a solitary fable of someone who left the world in exactly the same way they entered it. With her humanity stolen at birth, hers was an existence not of this world. The more beautiful something was, the more tragic its fate. Growing up in the mountains, this was not something Sojiro was taught, but something he learned from experience.
眠ってるみたいだ。
Sojiro turned his head as though he was being lured in. He knew it was rude to stare, but he couldn't fight his instincts. And then, this time his heart actually skipped a beat. She was not asleep at all. Expressionless, she was merely watching over him while he recovered. Sojiro froze, unable to turn his head away or think of something clever to say. It was like staring into her eyes turned him to stone. Perhaps because of her delicate features, she looked somewhat younger than him. On the other hand, her tranquil expression made him feel like she was older. Jet black hair, just to her shoulders. Her large eyes were set like onyx stones matching her hair. Devoid of emotion, her gaze stayed fixed on Sojiro. Even after their eyes met, she did not turn away. He wanted to speak, but could not find the words. It was not unlike a frog being stared down by a snake, nevertheless, he just could not bring himself to say something. Additionally, no matter how careless Sojiro might have been, he was painfully aware that this girl was as powerful as Aoko. Less talkative, to be sure, but still very, very powerful. Objectively, the scene was not unlike that of someone nursing a bedridden stranger. He had no idea what she may have been thinking about, but it seemed to him this harsh silence might last forever. All he could say for sure was that the quiet did not appear to bother her in the slightest. It was like some bizarre form of punishment.
これが青崎の仕込みなら手が込みすぎる。
He thought, keeping his eyes on the girl. He felt like the moment he turned his head or blinked, she might stab him in the chest with a hidden blade. And not because his imagination was running away with him. In the stifling silence, it was only natural that Sojiro would think back on what had happened in the amusement park, and it made him uneasy. But stronger than any anxiety was his fascination with the girl. Her slender frame and the milky white skin. The chill of her guarded stare, the warmth of her lingering femininity. It was a mixture of those two latter qualities that was almost magical.
Oh.
He stared at her for so long, he began to get the feeling that they had met somewhere before. Sometime before the conflict at Kitsy Land. He could not quite put his finger on it, but he was sure he had seen her previously.
今更だけど
His voice shattered the silence, or the frozen silence, in the room. He almost felt sorry for making noises as he spoke to her. But they could not very well just sit and stare at each other forever. Though he might have been the only one thinking they were staring, and perhaps she thought they were glaring at each other.
ここはどこで君は誰だかわかるかな
She narrowed her eyes slightly, though apparently not out of offense. There was no response. Just as he was thinking it would have been better to keep quiet, she quietly raised her hand.
これ、あなたのでしょ?
Her voice was cold but melodic. A white piece of cloth was wrapped in her fingers. There was no need to tell him what it was. He was conscious enough to recognize his own possessions. Sojiro sat speechless as she tossed it to him. Picking it up, he wrapped it around his neck.
青子はそれを知っているの?
He looked away in response to her blunt question. Oh, yeah, the white thing, right? He always has this, I guess this cloth on his neck, right? I wish that we could have seen that. Distracted by something unrelated, she called Aoko Ozaki by her given name, which led him to believe that the mountain Aoko had argued with in his dream was actually the girl beside him.
さあどうだろう
As sincerely as he could, he answered without presumption. There are things that should be known and things that need not be. There are also things that should be told and other things that must not be. Sojiro was not exactly sure what that she was referring to, however.
でもその方がいいとは思うよ
He smiled slightly at her question. Perhaps impressed by his response, the overwhelming pressure in the room dissipated noticeably. Or maybe she had been more nervous than he was the entire time, projecting the image that his room was her domain a tad too strongly. The tension faded. Sojiro tried to sit up and prop his arms beneath him. Now that they were talking, it seemed awkward to stay lying down. However, his body felt strange as he tried to move, and it surprised him how difficult it was to sit up. It took everything he had just to raise his upper body to a sitting position.
あれ洋服のままだ
As he threw the covers back, he tilted his head quizzically.
申し訳ない。こんないい布団なのに、これじゃ不釣り合いだ。というよりもったいない。
She stared at him, not expecting him to complain about not wearing pajamas. Somehow it appeared that he had done something to surprise her.
なんでだ。何もしてないぞ、俺。
Pouting a bit at the unwarranted curiosity, he turned to face her. Although he was still mostly laying down, it was at least a more dignified position.
それで、さっきの続きだけど。
Indeed, he needed to find out where he was and who she was before anything else. Actually, the more he thought about what happened at the amusement park, the more he got a sinking feeling in his stomach. Perhaps finally getting through to her, she calmly moved her arm from behind her back when... Oh, Aoko's here. Once again, they silently locked eyes. There was a startling sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. They both had a pretty good idea of who it was.
Alice, 約束!
Just as expected, Aoko Aozaki burst through the door with a thunderous roar. She entered wearing her school uniform, her long hair flowing behind her. Her breathing was heavy and her forehead was wrinkled by a scowl, granting her a demonic appearance.
Alice!
The girl named Alice scowled slightly in response. She may have even let a sigh of disappointment slip out.
早かったわね、青子。
Her calm voice was the polar opposite of Aoko's. Needless to say, her voice dripped with a brazen coldness.
そりゃあんたの性格は知り抜いてるからね。こういう時の短絡思考はこの2年で経験済みよ。お行儀がいいようで面倒になったらあっさり投げ捨てるのがあんたでしょ。いやね、人聞きの悪い。
Effortlessly, she brushed aside Aoko's jab. In doing so, Sojiro had the distinct impression that she no longer even realized he was in the room.
はっ、それで今日まで何度煮え湯を飲まされたことか。青子に譲ると言ったけど、よく考えると面倒だから私の方で処理しておいたわ。なんて言い訳、もう聞き飽きたっつーの。短気なのはそっちの自由だけど、それなら後の始末は相方に任せるのが最低限の筋ってもんじゃないの。そうね。そうでなければ共闘している意味がないわ。まあ今後の方針を勝手に決めた人のセリフじゃないとは思うけど。それもきっちり型をつけたでしょ。いい？勝ったのは私たちよ。逃げ切れば見逃してあげるって言ったのは誰？言動には責任を持ちなさい、アリス。それとも何？もしかして一番気に食わないのはそのあたりの理由なわけ？
Alice frowned slightly and fell silent. Her housemates seemed to have struck a nerve that Alice herself did not know was there.
とにかくこいつの扱いはちゃんと目が覚めて本人の意思でどうするか決めるまで保留ってことで合意したでしょ。人の留守中に出し抜くのはやめてよね。それ、青子、学校はどうしたの？まだ正午になったばかりなのに。アリスのとこが今日で終わりって思い出して家庭の事情ってことで早退したのよ。期末試験前だってのにほんと何やってんだか。
Aoko grumbled more to herself than anyone else in the room. Then she locked eyes with Alice. Or more accurately, they glared daggers at each other. The room had become tense once again, and it felt like a fight could break out any moment. With no escape, Sojiro had no choice but to sit and watch. But then, the electric silence that seemed like it would last forever suddenly broke about a minute later. Apparently, this sort of clash was an everyday occurrence.
私は今に行っているから彼に事情を説明してあげて
Alice stood up from the chair and made for the door. Watching her go, Sojiro cocked his head. In her hand was what could only be described as
果物ナイフ
fruit knife. He had no other words to describe the tool she was clutching.
アリス、あえて聞くけど、その手に持ってるの何？
Aoko asked Alice as she walked past.
探検ねどう見ても
Alice answered expressionlessly before briskly walking out of the room.
おお
Sojiro thought it's best not to think too deeply about the scene he had just witnessed. At any rate, the girl in black had withdrawn, and along with her the feeling of tension. Leaving a bedridden Sojiro alone with an Aoko still dressed for school. From Sojiro's perspective, this was a perfect chance to get answers to his ever-growing list of questions.
わけのわからないことだらけだ青崎
でしょうね。順序立てて説明してあげるから、ちょっと黙ってて。顔の麻痺も取れてるし、呼吸も再開っと。これならもう安心かな。
She nodded, satisfied as she took a seat.
どう？調子は。
なんかだるい
He answered meekly, dropping his shoulders. He opened and closed his left hand a few times, but moving his fingers felt slow and awkward. It was clear he was still in bad shape. Meanwhile, Aoko was blinking her eyes in wonder. Or was it admiration? Between Alice and Aoko, Sojiro did not know which of the girls was harder to read.
体が重いのは当然よ。丸2日経ってるし、寝てるだけでも体は弱ってるだろうし。でも、もう話せるくらい回復してるとは思わなかった。あんたって見かけより頑丈にできてるのね。
ん2日って
あれからそれだけ経ってるの。学校には欠席届出しといたから、その点は安心して。ガンドの呪いもダンプティの呪いも、私とアリスとで解除しといたから。
Sojiro nodded at the word curse, as if recalling it suddenly. It was all coming back to him now.
どうかした？そんな遠い目しちゃって。
ああ忘れてたそれで2日も寝込んでたのか怖いもんだな呪われるってことは
ほんと緊張感ないわねあんた。ローのように眠ってたのが嘘みたいよ。下手すると一生あのまま石膏もどきだったかもしれないのに。
ちょっと待った今すごいこと言わなかったか
But I guess he was too tired. He slept for 2 days, and Aoko, who had used her magic like to the limits, was, I guess, just fine.
言ったけど聞かぬが花よ。ま、経緯はどうあれ、後でアリスにお礼を言っときなさい。私じゃ解除できなかったんだから。
ひどい花もあったもんだあけどアリスっていうのはさっきの子か遊園地で 俺たちを殺そうとした？
Aoko replied that it was.
彼女ずっとそこに座ってたけど、ここは彼女の部屋なのか？
Sojiro scanned the room again. He was not accustomed to sleeping on anything other than a futon, and the room looked especially foreign to him.
ここはただの客室。長いこと使ってなかったから埃だらけでしょ。それよりアリスと何か話したの？あなた。
おう。いや、あれを会話というのはちょっと。
He brought his hand to his mouth and recalled a few words they exchanged. As Sojiro said, calling it a conversation would be a gross overstatement. And yet, thinking back on it, it seemed like they had talked for hours, which brought an uncomfortable smile to his face.
とはいえ、緊張は解けたと思うよ。青崎がやってくるのがもう少し遅かったらよかったのに。
What? Although it would have been nice if he had come a little later, Aozaki. You want to talk more with Alice? I mean, Alice is, pretty. Aoko narrowed her eyes at his innocent slip of the tongue. She knew Sojiro didn't mean to treat her like a nuisance, but nevertheless she found it hard to take the full brunt of the words said to her face. Oh look, her face is getting smaller and smaller. Even worse, she sensed she was getting used to his manner of speaking.
でも、だからなのかもね。相変わらず首の皮一枚の人生を送ってるわ、あなたって。
He tilted his head, clearly confused.
だから、あんたはよっぽどアリス好みの対応をしたのよ。まだ生きてるってそういうこと。
ん？
No matter how hard he tried, he could not grasp what she was getting at. He decided to change the subject to something else.
ところで、ここはどこなんだ？あの子に聞いても教えてくれなかったけど、青崎なら教えてくれるだろ？
ここは三崎町の幽霊屋敷よ。正確には久遠寺邸と言えばいいかしらね。さっきの子、久遠寺アリスの持ち家で私が住んでるところでもある。あの後あなたをここまで持ってきたんだけど覚えてないでしょ？
Did you imagine how cool it would be, right? For example, you're walking town and someone asks you, where do you live? And you just point up on that hill, that mansion right there. You see that? Yeah, that's where my house is. Something about the way she said that made him feel uncomfortable.
久遠寺っていう名前は聞き覚えがあるような。そうだ、よく商店街でおじさんたちが話してた。なんでも偉いお金持ちだとかなんとか。
それ、アリスの前ではご法度よ。穏便にここで暮らしたいならね。
If you want to live here in peace, that is. Why, he's gonna live here now?
お？
Confused yet again, Sojiro tilted his head for what seemed like the 100th time that day. And once again he had heard something to make him feel uneasy.
青崎、君今なんて言った？
So I guess Alice doesn't want Sojiro to go because of all the incidents that happened, right? So she's gonna allow him to live, but he's gotta stay here or live here, I mean.
しずきくん、私ね、あからさまな嘘を言う人と同じことを何度も言わせる人と察しの悪い人には容赦しないから。
Okay.
そのあたり覚えておいてね。ここで平穏に暮らしたいなら。
With her best smile, Aoko made her threatening proclamation. Needless to say, it caught Sojiro completely off guard.
気のせいならいいんだけど、君の言葉には俺がここに住むような響きが感じられる。
He shot her an honest stare of disapproval. It was the best resistance he could muster. But it was not in the slightest effective against Aoko's overpowering, ruthless glare.
あなた、自分の立場を分かってる？
He considered her words carefully. He wanted to openly express his feelings on the matter, but instead, he swallowed his words and shook his head. Despite his typical inability to read people's emotions, he at least seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. It appeared that he had finally realized that it was his carefree mood typically got on Aoko's nerves.
ああ、そうだった。あんたに回りくどいこと言っても無駄だったのよね。いいわ。考える時間ぐらいあげたかったけど、時間もないし、はっきりと言ってあげる。いい？しずきくん。この度、あなたは私たちの監視下に置かれることになりました。しばらくはここで一緒に暮らしてもらいます。もちろん生殺与奪の権利はこちらにあるという条件で。
The blatant tyranny in her voice caused him to sputter. So basically he is gonna be under surveillance for now. He wished that she would stop smiling in an attempt to make it seem any less outrageous.
一緒に住むって青崎とか？
It was not the feigned expectation of living under the same roof with Aoko that had him flustered. Rather, he was genuinely concerned about his own safety. True. You're gonna live now in a mansion with two people. The other one tried to kill you, right? And then later on, she saved you, while there's another one, the owner of this house, tried to kill you as well. Regardless of how good-natured he was, it seemed he finally had come to grips with the fact that he just escaped death.
とんでもない。冬眠前の熊と一緒に暖を取るようなもんだ。
True. Aoko agreed as a blunt comparison as it was.
たまには的確な比喩をするじゃない。あなたの言う通り、下手なことをしたり決まりを破ったりしたら、今度こそ息の根止めるからね。それと、ここに住んでるのは私とアリスの2人だけよ。あの子、私なんかより数倍常識ないから、気をつけないと死んじゃうぞ。
Aoko was 100% serious. It was her sincerity that made it all the more believable.
いや。
Obviously, there was no way the victim Sojiro could accept these terms.
待ってくれ。俺にはちっとも青崎がわからない。監視するって言うけど、なんでそんな話になってるんだ？考えられる範囲、悪いこととかしてないし、そもそも俺を見張っても得なことなんて一個もないし、青崎はいろいろ間違ってる。いや、それとも魔術師っていうのはみんな青崎みたいなのか。
Arrogant and selfish were the words that the harmless boy's gaze seemed to imply. Aoko felt a headache coming on. Due to his innate easygoing persona, Sojiro had not thought to question that Aoko being a mage was out of the ordinary.
だからあんたがそういう風に誰はばかることなく私たちのことを言いふらさないかを見張ってんじゃない、この常識なし。
Aoko flew out of her chair. She had been doing her best to keep her cool, but it seemed that her well of patience had finally run dry. Witnessing Aoko's snap, Sojiro clapped his hands together.
そうか。青崎が俺を殺そうとしたのは魔術師であることを隠さなくちゃいけないからだったっけ？うん、それならわかる。監視するのは青崎の秘密のことで、俺の命云々はおまけみたいなものか。
そりゃ本質的に言えばそうだけど、身も蓋もないわね、その言い方。
けどそれはあまり意味がないんじゃないか？学校もあるしバイトだってあるんだ。一日中この家から出ないわけにはいかないんだぞ。
In an instant, Sojuro's objectivity had her stumped, leaving her at a loss for words. He honestly had no idea what position he was in. To believe that he had any sort of freedom at this point was shocking, to say the least.
いや、落ち着け私。話が早くなってある意味助かるし。
Aoko somehow managed to compose herself. As a matter of fact, she never had any intention of imprisoning him. Stripping him of his freedom and incarcerating him would go against their agreement anyway. Besides, if she was going to go that far, it would be easier to just kill him. To Aoko, letting him live meant showing a modicum of respect to Sojuro's way of life.
もしかして、この部屋から出ちゃいけないのか、俺。
A light bulb went on in his head as he blurted out what he was thinking. It appeared he had finally got the grim message. Aoko looked somewhat satisfied at his dismay.
大丈夫よ。監禁生活なんて面倒なことだけはしないから。あなたの自由はそれなりに考慮してあります。そのあたりのさじ加減はアリスの手腕に任せてあるから、あなたは心配しなくていいわ。
A gloomy look fell over Soldier's face as he found his concern growing by the second.
いい？あなたの処遇はこの家に住むことを前提にした監視で、それも解決策が見つかるまでの期間限定。何でもいいから目撃者を殺すなんてことより、こっちの方がよっぽど穏便でしょ？だいたいこれは私とあなたとの約束なんだから、いちいち文句言わないでよね。
She sighed as she stared Sojiro down as he lay on the bed.
けど勘違いはしないで。ここじゃあんたの地位は最下層のさらに下、番犬より下なんだから。あんたの生殺与奪はあの夜から私が握ってるんだから。あんたは私に所有されてるようなもんなの。さあ、これで自分の立場分かった？
As Alice finished her declaration, Sojiro subtly looked up the ceiling so she would not notice his reaction. Wait, Alice? Why say Alice? He meant no offense to Aoko, but he had to hide the fact that he fundamentally disagreed with her analogy. Yeah, what is it? As Alice finished her declaration? What? In Sojiro's opinion, it was disrespectful to both dogs and humans to call him lower than a dog. A more accurate analogy of their power dynamic would be that of a rabbit and a wild boar, hence why he chose not to voice his opinion. I guess that's why the reason for the name of this episode is The Life of a Dog. Unlike his apartment, the ceiling here was decorated with ornate patterns. Putting aside how he would be treated here in terms of lodging, it was a definite upgrade. That I would live here. Mansion? Much nicer place. I mean, sure, there are two people here who tried to kill you, but I mean, they're cool now, I guess. Maybe it would not be all that bad. Sojiro nodded slowly as if to persuade himself. And
とりあえず命は助けてあげるから。
that is what she had told him not 2 days ago.
あまり納得したくないけど、自分の立場は分かったよ。うん、確かにそんな約束だった。いろいろと言いたいことはあるけど、それは認めるしかない。だけど、君たちと一緒に住めっていうのは本気なのか？青崎は細かいことは気にしないとしても、さっきの子は嫌がりそうだし、俺だって少しは。
At the point, he zipped his lips. Ako's eyes were tinged with bloodlust.
あら、しずきくんはご不満？
That smile is kinda scary though. Her contrived smile, so obviously forced, struck despair in Sojiro's heart. Come to think of it, he vaguely recalled her warnings to him not to make her repeat herself. Furthermore, as a practical matter, Sojiro Shizuki's life was now in the hands of Aoko Aozaki, It would be unwise to anger her further, he told himself as speaking to a third person.
いや別にだってそれ以外ないんだろ
None, Aoko said with a firm nod of her head. Sojiro slumped his shoulders in surrender.
青崎の言い分は分かったただ一応聞いておきたいんだけど俺の人権はどこに行ってしまったんだろ
バカね。そんな形のないものなんて初めからあるわけないでしょ。つまんないこと言わないでよ。
Sojiro reflected upon her answer, now feeling like his question was indeed stupid. He should have already known the answer before he asked.
ああだと思ったそんな気はしてたんだ目が覚める前から
His muttering provoked a dubious stare from Aoko before she quickly retracted it. If she questioned every little thing he said, they would be there until sundown.
とにかく納得いったみたいね。じゃあ次、いよいよ本題。今に移動するわよ。説明しなくちゃいけないことが山ほどあるんだから。って一人で立てる？
さっきから手を動かしてたから血は巡ってる歩くぐらいならいけそうだ
そうなら問題ないわね。
With that, she turned her back and walked away from him. He had seen this bold form of hers many times before. What did she say? Instantly, the memories flashed back to him like lightning.
そうだった青崎はこういうやつだった
Without knowing it, he cracked a smile. He was so lost that he did not know his left from his right, but recalling this alone was enough to calm him. The Aoko he knew was different from the one in the House of Mirrors. She was not the brooding girl he saw there. He felt a pang of nostalgia. The Aoko he knew was brisk in movement and unfaltering in gaze, just like this one. She was the same as when he first met her, moody yet overflowing with confidence in her element.
ほら、急いだ急いだ。アリスがさっきから居間でお待ちかねよ。
She was already outside the door, standing in the chilly corridor.
寝たきりの辛さを知らないだろう青崎は
Grunting and groaning, Sojiro eventually got to his feet. His body heavy and stiff while he was lying down, cried out in pain as he tried to stand and walk. Every step sent shooting pains through his bones. Despite this, he put on a calm face and made his way toward Aoko. Typically, he was quick to not pay any mind to life's little struggles, but these pains he needed to force himself to consciously ignore them. In other words, he was displaying a false bravado, an uncharacteristic reaction for someone who never suppressed their true feelings.
驚いた。あんた本当にタフね。
ありがとうけど心は弱いんだ
そう。参考までに心に留めておくわ。できるだけ優しく扱えるようにね。
Naturally, her voice was devoid of any true empathy. She turned away from the once more dejected Sojiro and began walking briskly down the corridor.
と。
Just then, as she stopped, feet snapped together as though something had popped into her head. And just as if she was remembering something she had forgotten in a completely trivial way.
それじゃあ行くわよ。ついてきて、宗十郎。
She gallantly turned back the way she was heading, the words sounding so natural as she spoke them. Aoko did not see the look in Soldier's eyes as he heard her words. For though she worked in the arcane, the spell Aoko had woven was apparent to everyone but her. After blinking his eyes as if blinded by something, Soldier casually nodded and followed behind her. The sheer size of the interior was daunting. Like, look at this. Now I'm just checking some notes here. Okay. The 3 floors of this mansion contained more rooms than Sojiro's entire apartment building, except their size was excessive. Here, the mansion rooms seemed too numerous for so few inhabitants, its lavish, carpeted halls cold and dreary. The guest room that Sojiro had been sleeping in was on the 2nd floor of the east wing. A staircase leading down to the 1st floor was at the end of the corridor at the center of the mansion. Winter sunlight beamed through the windows, which only made the empty corridor appear even lonelier. The center of the mansion was topped by a vaulted skylight overlooking the 1st floor. The staircase connecting the 1st and 2nd floors lined its walls. Another staircase at the other end of the 2nd floor corridor presumably led to an attic or storeroom of some sort on the 3rd floor. Paying no mind to Sojiro's gawking, Aoko descended the stairs with familiar steps. The foyer was a place of white and wood grain. Its hardwood floors shone brightly under the sunlight coming in from the ceiling, and the tall white walls were spotless and brawny. There was a staircase leading to the 2nd floor and along a unused fireplace. A neglected telephone sat on a table opposite a solemn grandfather clock. It was more like an old castle than a mansion. Aoko shot Sojiro a callous stare, who stood captivated by the otherworldly scenery. I mean, if you're not used to seeing things like this, of course you'd be captivated. I would be captivated if I went to something like this place. I mean, of course, seeing something so big like this. Like, if you're a normal person and you see something like this, you would think like, yeah, it's a hotel. It's a very old castle. But if you're used to it, like, it's just a house, right?
今はこっちよ。ぼさっとしない。
She grabbed the knob of the door next to the stairs. There were 4 doors to the foyer, and the easternmost as you entered the house led to the drawing room. The door on the opposite side of the foyer led to the mansion's west wing. To the south was the entrance. On the north side was one more door next to the fireplace. Tucked underneath the stairs, this door connected to a bathroom unbeknownst to Sojiro. Due to the lack of windows, the 1st floor's corridors were not well lit. If the 2nd floor was a seldom attended infirmary and the foyer a stairwell into some foreign castle, then the 1st floor corridor was a windowless labyrinth, not unlike the corridors of a hotel. Although it had not been long since Sojiro came to the city, even he could feel this place was out of the ordinary. Seeing as how he was going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, he found it hard to get excited about living in a haunted house.
そこが今で奥が厨房ね。簡単な料理ぐらいはできるようになってるから。今の隣にはサンルームがあるんだけど、ここが食卓の代わり。ってそんなの後でいっか。
Aoko said, reaching for a door along the dim corridor. However, she paused before turning the knob. She flashed Sojiro a meaningful glance, which she quickly withdrew. Then without further ado, she opened the door. And there she was.
お待たせ。承諾したわよ、あいつ。
Okay. So we'll take a break here, as I guess we're going to be talking to Alice yet again in this second part. But yeah, Sojiro waking up. 2 days has passed since the battle. It seems that they're good now, but they have a little, I guess, circumstance that Sojiro must stay here under surveillance. But he will still be alive, so I guess that's good. I wonder what they're going to be talking about, especially with Alice here. Can't wait for that. But anyways, we are going to continue this and do more of A Witch and the Holy Night in the next one. So I'll just see you then, guys. Bye-bye.